Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses right off. You've been extremely helpful, and I know we'll hopefully rely on you in the future. Administrator Garvey, you've handled yourself very well. Let me tee one up for you. I hope I'm sure you'll handle this one well. It's a tough one. It's a direct one, and it comes from some of my experience from the joint inquiry where I served, trying to put together the information that was coming forward from the intelligence component here to the FAA. This is unclassified and was read from our report in open hearing by one of our staff members. In January of 1995, a Philippine National Police raid turned up materials in Manila indicating that 3 individuals, including Ramzi Youssef, planned, among other things, to crash an airplane into the CIA headquarters. This information was passed on to the FAA, which briefed U.S. and major foreign carriers. That's 1995. 1998, August, the intelligence community obtained information that a group of unidentified Arabs planned to fly an explosive-laden plane from a foreign country into the World Trade Center. September 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that Osama bin Laden's next operation could involve flying aircraft loaded with explosives into a U.S. airport. In November 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that a Turkish Islamic extremist group had planned a suicide attack. Part of this would involve crashing an airplane packed with explosives into Ataturk's tomb during a government ceremony. In March 1999, the intelligence community obtained information regarding plans by an Al-Qaeda member who was a U.S. citizen to fly a hang glider into an Egyptian presidential palace. And in August 2001, the intelligence community obtained information regarding a plan to either bomb the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi from an airplane or crash an airplane into it. The CIA disseminated several of these reports to the FBI and to the agencies, and one of the agencies that it disseminated this to was the FAA. Now, I know that since 1991, the FAA also had, since the counterterrorism unit was set up in 1986, the FAA had an intelligence liaison officer full-time with the CIA, FBI, and state. So my question is, you've got these different reports coming in from intelligence sources. You've got a full-time person from the FAA picking this stuff up. Now, it may not be we have a planned attack on such and such a date, but it's certainly accumulation of evidence from intelligence sources that the FAA has access to that this could be a scenario that happens in the United States. It's being planned, it's being, talked about all over the world. Why didn't the FAA do more to look at the possibility that this could happen in the United States?
Well, first of all, the 1995 incident that you referred to, I think the first one you began with, in fact, that is one where a series of countermeasures were developed literally as we learned information. And in fact, that is one where the appropriate action was taken and the plot was thwarted. The other ones, I'd like to go back and provide some information to you for the record. I can tell you that again, the threat assessment that we were getting, or the threat assessment and that we were letting the airlines know about, was very much focused on overseas targets, overseas U.S. interests. That's really where the emphasis was. That's what we were.
But that 95 incident was Langley, Virginia. It wasn't overseas.
Right, but again, I think that is an example where we did take the appropriate measures. And again, I'll go back and say that in each one of these cases, or I'd like to provide more information for the record, but in any number of those cases, again, working with the intelligence community, it was tracked down and the source was deemed either not credible, or the most likely, or most generally, it was the source was not credible. But it was.
But Administrator, how do we get this intelligence capability where FAA has a permanent stand-up capability within CTC to communicate these things to the top level of the FAA, and then hope that these administrators will at least evolve plans? Mr. Mead said that the 1970s plan did not really evolve much over the last 20 or 30 years. You kept targeting a hijacker, and these other plans kept coming at you. How do we set up the intelligence component with the top people at the FAA to be proactive on this kind of possibility rather than just reactive to it?
Well, first of all, I think there were a number of, and if you look back at some of the history, I think you will find some places where the FAA was very proactive. The countermeasures were developed, and I again mentioned 95. And we do have, or the FAA does have, a very, very active intelligence branch. We are dependent on the information that we get from the CIA, and with a close a close examination of that information with the CIA, with the FBI. We do depend on them for the raw intelligence. Should there have been better communication? I think absolutely. I think that's been acknowledged really right from the beginning. I think in some cases we got appropriate and right information. I think in other cases we probably didn't get enough. I think it's also important to remember that this is there's a lot of information coming at the intelligence community, and that very often trying to determine what is the right priority, whether or not the source is credible, that's a very great challenge. I think there have been tremendous strides since 9/11 in terms of communication. The posture, I think, for the FAA always was, we set up the criteria, pass that on to the intelligence community, this is what we need. They would give us information where they thought there was an aviation threat. Sometimes, perhaps, the information we needed perhaps wasn't necessarily a specific aviation threat. We may have missed some.
Let me just conclude by asking you one final question about the red teams. Mr. Mead agrees with you that there was no cover-up involved in some of the complaints about what red teams reported. But he did say that it either would be a cover-up or implementing effective improvements, and you were unable to do them. Were there reasons, institutional reasons, that you could not implement the recommendations of the red team, or what were the problems there?
In my experience, the red team recommendations were implemented. I think the point that Mr. Mead made in his report, which I think he was absolutely right on, is that we were not always as effective as we should have been in circling back to the red team, letting them know what recommendations had been implemented. I will say in the summer, September 11th, the new Deputy Associate Administrator for Security recognized that as a problem and actually had a meeting with the red team and said, look, we've got to do a better job of that. That was reinforced by the work that Mr. Mead did, and I believe, we certainly made those changes, and I believe some of that is still incorporated into the TSA. In any case where a recommendation may not have been implemented, I'd like to go back and look at it. But we really implemented most of them, nearly all of them. And I think there may have been some individual ones where, for various reasons, there was a policy decision that it wasn't the right recommendation. Again, I want to go back to what I said. It was that kind of work that helped to shape and make the changes to training, help us formulate the security rule, the screener security rule. So it was a part of that.
Mr. Mead?
Yeah. I'd like to clarify
Please.
what we found. One, there was an allegation that FAA covered up. We did not substantiate that allegation. In fact, we found that after the red team would go out, they would, for example, just an example of their activity, they would try to get through passenger screening checkpoints with prohibited objects, not box cutters, right? Clearly prohibited objects in their luggage. They would try to conceal it, as would a saboteur or a terrorist. Or they would try to get something through an explosive detection machines. These are these $1 million SUV type machines. They would achieve success in more times than you would like to see. FAA would, in fact, communicate that the red team had found these shortcomings to the airlines and to the screening companies. They would not, they would not feed back that they had done so to the red team, so the red team is frustrated. But also, our work has shown that whatever the airlines did with it did not yield permanent improvements, because we would go back out with our auditors and investigators, we would try to penetrate security, and we'd be able to, and nobody
With the
catches.
same rates.
So that's what I mean by the follow-up. The follow-up, there was communication back to the airlines, but, and then FAA's ability, what was FAA going to do, fine them? They didn't have, the fines were a cost of doing business. I think Ms. Garvey would agree with that. That was another weakness in the system.
Mr. Mead is right, and that is exactly why the screener rule, in our view, was so important, why we were focused on it, why we got it ready in the fall of 2000.